Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Earlier this month, President Donald Trump made comments about nationalizing voting, which has caused some concern about the upcoming midterm elections. On the state level, lawmakers are pushing for voting reforms before session ends in June. Joining me now is one of the lawmakers, State Senator Kristen Gonzalez, who chairs the Senate Elections Committee and is talking about some of that legislation. Senator, welcome back to Capitol Tonight. We appreciate the time this evening.
It's great to be here again.
All right, first question right out of the gate. What did you make of the president's comments regarding federalizing elections?
You know, it is truly remarkable to me that some of the biggest attacks in our elections right now seem to be coming from the federal government. Nationalizing elections isn't the first instance. We've had questions around mail-in voting. The federal government has certainly signaled there may be ICE presence at poll sites. And so a lot of the challenges we're recently facing, unfortunately, aren't coming from the local boards or from our city elections, but really from our federal government.
Some of the bills that are being pushed include protecting voters and poll workers from intimidation. Is that something that you're seeing here in our state?
That's a great question. So in response to all of the threats that we're hearing coming out of the Trump administration, we've been really intentional in New York State about regulating and protecting our elections and election infrastructure. Every year at the start of session, on the very first day, we have an elections package. And as part of that package this year, I carried an election officer protection bill because we've seen not only in New York, but across the country, cases of election officers getting doxxed online. And so we put forward legislation that increased protections for them because we've seen a decrease in the number of election officers that have been signing up or returning to their roles. Luckily in New York, we've seen a lot fewer cases and certainly don't have the same level of threat, but we want to make sure we're being proactive. And then in addition to that package, we now have another package of 3 bills as part of our larger elections committee portfolio that talk about what it means to have arrests at poll site and making sure that we do not have an increased presence in that sense, and talking about what happens when elections might be disrupted, and then certainly making sure we're increasing access to the ballot box overall.
With regard to increasing access to the ballot box, there have been talks on the national level about requiring identification for voters. About 80%, a little more than that of Americans in a recent poll, approve of that. Is that something that you could agree with, or something that you say, we don't need voter ID here?
You know, I am someone who's very data-driven in my approach, and what numerous studies have shown is that voter ID laws do not work. They serve as another barrier to the ballot box. We have a significant number of Americans that, actually either lack identification, don't have the resources to pay for identification, or certainly just, there are things that can happen, losing your wallet the day before an election. None of those things should be a barrier to exercising your fundamental right to vote. And on the other end of that, we also do not have any significant number of voter fraud from folks who are happening to, because they're somehow coming to the polls not having ID, then suddenly voting. There really is no data to support that is a widespread issue in our elections. So for me, it's always really important to look at this issue and say, what is going to give the maximum access to every American and certainly every New Yorker in exercising their right in order for us to have a healthy and thriving democracy.
Senator Gonzalez, back in 2021, voters rejected state constitutional amendments to establish same-day voter registration, changing redistricting procedures, and allowing no-excuse absentee voting in the last 5 years. Do you think that voter sentiment has changed enough that voters would maybe be more supportive of changes to the system, especially this close to an election?
I think it's really incumbent on us in the legislature to make sure we're doing the work on educating our voters and constituents on what bills exist. I've certainly seen a lot of support and renewed support in the context of some of the federal issues we mentioned at the start. for election protections and an increase in voter access. And that certainly looks like support for bills around automatic voter registration. So allowing, if you're going to the DMV to get your license, having you be automatically allowed to also vote instead of having that be a separate process. You also, if you do not want to register to vote, can opt out. So we're allowing it to be flexible for voters. That bill is held by Senator Janaris, and I mention it because again, we've had a healthy democracy and years of progress in New York State, but the reason we're seeing this package of bills and the broad support on the ground for these bills is because I think voters understand that we can't take our democracy for granted, and there is still more that the state can do to protect our elections.
Speaking of more that the state can do to protect elections, do you think more needs to be done in terms of increasing technology and allowing New York State to catch up with some of the other states? Because while we're getting there, we've still seen at times during elections, this site has gone down or this printer isn't working, so now we can't print these ballots. Do we need to put more money forth? Does the state need to really invest even more in the technology surrounding Election Day?
I would say certainly there's always more we could be doing, but I'm really proud of the fact that for the last 3 years, we've actually put money in the budget in order to support modernization efforts for local boards. I've heard from them certainly that they would like to see more support. So this year we're looking at a little bit of support for that line item of over $50 million, but certainly, I think modernization, how we use technology, is top of mind. But I also want to, call out the fact that we have voters, and I've had constituents come to me that say, well, they still want, their physical ballots. And so as much as we're pushing ahead with modernizing our infrastructure and even looking at things like election cybersecurity, because we know the threat landscape is changing, we're also making sure that it's a yes and approach. And in some cases, also hearing feedback that in modernizing, we're still keeping some of our traditional processes like paper ballots.
Senator Gonzalez, you yourself said that there's low instances of voter fraud here in New York State, which is a good thing for us in New York State. But there are still a lot of people who have those concerns and are hearing things maybe from the outside and are wondering what's real, what's fake. What do you say to those people who still have those concerns that things might not be on the up and up in certain states, including here in New York?
I will say that we are very lucky here in New York, as you mentioned, to have some of the best election protections and election laws in the entire country. And while we work to preserve those and expand them, we also have enforcement. So it is a crime to, go to a ballot box and present to be someone that you are not. And so, of course, with those laws that exist, we'll always look to enforce them. But right now, that is not the critical threat to our elections because, as I mentioned, there has not been widespread voter fraud here in New York. What we are looking at, though, as a state, and what I'm really proud of, is what some other threats to our elections could be. I mentioned some of the federal threats, but another issue is cybersecurity. The Trump administration cut cybersecurity funding nationwide for our elections and our local boards. So in response to that, the New York Board of Elections has certainly been working with our local boards to provide cybersecurity support. But my office actually led a day-long event where we convened stakeholders across not only downstate, but also upstate as well, to talk about this issue and to talk about what some of those evolving threats are. And we're putting forward a bill on election security navigators so we can bolster the protections for our local elections. And we're also going to be continuing to push that conversation forward, not only at the state level, but again, and on a very local level, because truly what we can do is not just fill the gap that is now left by the federal government, but we can go even further. So I'm proud to have strong and healthy elections, but I'm also really proud to be in a state where we can do this work, think about new threats moving forward, be proactive, and fund cybersecurity.
Senator Kristen Gonzalez, chair of the Senate Elections Committee, thank you so much for the time this evening. I know this is a very busy session time for you, so we appreciate you joining the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage. And click the subscribe button here. You can also download our app and watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.